Welcome to NewYorkBIO's virtual breakfast series, a digital program created in 2020 featuring fireside chats with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. This week's episode features Loren Busby, investor, advisor to early stage startups, and entrepreneur in residence at Weill Cornell Medical Center.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Hawks-Bland, and I am the CEO at NewYorkBIO. Welcome again to one of our NewYorkBIO virtual breakfast series. This morning, we have investor Loren Busby with us, so we're going to cover a whole bunch of topics because she's worked on a whole bunch of things throughout her career that are very exciting and interesting for our community. As a matter of housekeeping, don't forget, we'd love for you to ask your questions as we go through our conversation with her. So please put your questions in the Q&A box or the chat, and Derek and I will be monitoring those as we talk with her. With that, I am going to turn it over to Derek to do a more thorough introduction of our guests.
All right. Well, good morning, Loren. Thank you so much for being here. I love these things, and I love it when we bring on people that have had a big impact in New York City over the last little while, just because, I've been there and I've lived it, and it's been terrific to see kind of so many people that have been part of the fabric of what's kind of brought New York City along over the last 10 years. So with that as a bit of an intro, why don't you tell us a little bit about a little background about how you came to be where you are, and then we'll get into everything. So good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Jennifer and Derek. Thank you. So I came to be in the New York City life sciences ecosystem through a circuitous route. I actually began working in the venture capital world while I was in college. I worked for a small spin out from a VC in Hartford, Connecticut. And from there, I went to Boston, Massachusetts, or around Boston, Massachusetts, and I worked for a company called Venture Economics, which at that time was the publisher of the Venture Capital Journal. And I say to my friends that that was the best job ever because someone paid me to learn all about the technologies that were being developed and funded by VC companies. So it was great. Worked off of Route 128, exit 19A, but we were acquired in my third year of that tenure, and we were acquired by Thomson Financial. So moved to New York City, and that's how I came to the New York City ecosystem. And from there, I actually did some coding while I was at Thomson, worked on a database that is currently available today called Venture Expert. And I went to business school here at Columbia. And then after business school, I worked for 3 different types of investment groups. One was endowment, one was a SBIC, and one was a private partnership, all startup type ventures when we began. So 3 different startup VC funds.
Fantastic. And then ultimately, you went from the investing side of the table to the operating side of the table.
Yes, I did, and that was on purpose. And I love being on the investment side. I love all the people and the entrepreneurs, working with the entrepreneurs. I found that at the stage of my life where I was when I made this transition, which was my mid-40s, that it was time for me to actually do something different other than read securities purchase agreements and do those things. And I wanted to get closer to the closer to the customer of some of these companies, because as a VC, you really don't get to sit in front of the customer. And that's where a lot of the action happened. I wanted to be more involved and help the companies along on their transition to becoming whatever their next plateau was. And so I got more involved on the operating side.
Do you think that affected your perspective as an investor? There's kind of I don't know if it's an argument, but there are some people that are firmly in the camp where great investors should have operating experience, and there are people in the other camp where great investors simply need great investment experience. And Fred Wilson is a titan of tech angel investing and venture investing, and who has never operated in a company before. It doesn't seem to affect him. But did that change your perspective a little bit about how you thought as an investor?
Yes, most definitely. It's both sides are not easy. Okay, both sides are not easy. Even when you're an investor at a VC fund, having to the pressure to put money to work, pressure to find the right deal, pressure to raise capital, pressure to do the right type of investing, keep the portfolio in balance. But on the entrepreneurial side, there's also a lot of obvious pressure in terms of getting the product right, getting the marketplace right, managing people. That's a big deal as an entrepreneur. So yeah, it's hard on both sides. Do I have an appreciation for entrepreneurs more now that I'm involved more closely with the companies? Absolutely. There's a lot at risk for the entrepreneur. And I know that that's a statement we hear all the time, but I see some of these folks putting their families, aside for a good chunk of, 5-6 years. I see them putting their parents aside. I see them working through weekends for months at a time, and it's very challenging.
Yeah, it's a thing that never really gets a lot of attention. There's a lot of, I think, romanticism involved in being a founder of a company or working with a startup. But the real challenges, the real risks, and the real sacrifices are never talked about. It's a lonely existence in a lot of ways, and the risk that you put on your family and everybody else, not only financially, but with all of the stress that you take on as a founder, is very, very real. And there aren't a lot of people to talk to about that either. It's very, very challenging, and I think most people don't know about it. It gets lost in the press release stories of the zero to billionaire type things that everybody reads. Everybody gets lost in the fairy tale, but the actual nuts and bolts of it is very rarely talked about.
Yeah. Well, yes, we've had conversations, you and I, Derek, as well as others in my circle. The 8-digit Series A round, and I'm not talking about 10 million, I'm talking about 50, 80. One case I saw recently, a 9-digit Series A round. That does not happen to everybody. That only happens to 10 to 15% of the companies at best.
Yeah.
And the remaining companies, the other 85 to 90%, are left to compare themselves to that benchmark that is the only publicly available benchmark, and it's very disheartening. So part of what I do on a regular basis, keep that in perspective, that you don't necessarily need to have a press release that says you raised $54 million to make progress. You need, Mr. or Miss Entrepreneur, $2 to $3 million, and let's work together to find that $2 or $3 million.
Yes. And the press releases also very rarely mention things like tranching or anything else like that. The press release makes it seem like the day before, $54 million magically appeared in a bank account. Everybody got raises, you hired everyone, and now everyone is just fine, which of course is not really true. It's still potentially trickle capital, but the top line just sounds better. And there's a lot of that now. Literally, the Medici fund just announced today. It's the headline is a $250 million A round, but what they really did was they rolled up 10 companies into this thing that is now a $250 million company. But the thing that everyone reads in the press release is $250 million A round. So, I think there's some advantages to being able to deploy lots of capital, and I think that's affected certain things in a lot of different ways. But the jargon of a Series A to people means it feels like that's the first capital in, and like you're starting a company. And the reality is that many of these companies had momentum and a lot of other things behind them before any of that money even hits the bank account.
Yes. And I would also say that in our ecosystem, we talked a little bit about this. In our ecosystem, it is typical for the therapeutics companies and some of these digital health companies to get SBIR grants. Yeah. And that is a wonderful thing, right? If you want non-dilutive capital, it's a very selective process. It does give you an imprimatur on what you're doing as an entrepreneur. But for some reason, it's not often looked upon by the VC world as with the same romance as getting a Series A with an 8-figure number.
Yeah.
But do you think that, I mean, given, let's think about New York, our ecosystem, right? Do you think that entrepreneurs really think they're going to get the 60, 80 million sort of Series A quickly? Or do you think they realize now, based on all the work around entrepreneurship and how to start a company that's been going on, that they realize that it could be a long sort of hard road?
Oh, I think it's an education process no matter which road you go. Because if you raise that $8 million Series A round, 8-figure Series A round, you have other pressures, okay? And it's not easy to put all of that money to work and simultaneously manage all those projects and have the oversight of certain folks who may, I'm not saying all VCs do, but may, after the second board meeting, ask you, what's your merger and acquisition strategy and who are you talking to?
Right.
So, so I think it's hard no matter which road you go. I think that many of the entrepreneurs who do not get that Series A round, that's an 8-figure number, need to prepare their family, prepare themselves, prepare their employees, because the employees are stakeholders too, that it may be a tough road. But also, I would say, remember that when you do get an offer and you sort of don't maybe like the smell of all the terms in the term sheet, okay, that money could lubricate your process, your business, your life, the life of your employees, and it could make things a lot easier, even if all of the terms are not in your favor.
Yeah.
It's a balance.
Yeah, and there's some element of, there's a little bit of a binary nature to fundraising, right? You either sign the documents or you don't. And, it's possible that there are some things in the documents that won't be perfect. And there are certainly things in certain documents that should be, kind of walk away type terms. But the decision to walk away is a very, very difficult one, especially if it's, it's not like all of your offers necessarily come in at once. I think the people that are very, very good at it can run a process and get multiple term sheets and things like that. But a lot of times you have these entrepreneurs that, really kind of charge ahead, and they may only get one term sheet from someone who's going to lead. And it's a very, very hard problem to even think about. How hard do you push back? Because that term sheet can go away.
Yes. But also, how fast can you get to your next inflection point if you had the money? Okay.
Right.
And
True.
even if you have to hold your nose a little bit on certain terms, valuation in particular, can you get to the next inflection point and really make a difference on the next round? I'm a little battle scarred, either scarred or stripes, I'm not sure, that I've seen companies walk away from certain money, and then I've seen them fail. And it's very hard to watch. I was also part of being in the VC world where, the entrepreneur doesn't want you in the business 80% of the time. They may come to you with questions. They may ask you for referrals. They're certainly going to come to you when they need money, but they don't want to bring you all of their problems. And it's just very hard to watch when certain mistakes are made.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned valuation as the trigger. I think that's kind of the term that so many people gravitate towards. I think valuation and dilution is the term that founders can kind of most readily understand because it's just math. And oftentimes, it's the other stuff. It's the other stuff that's really important. It's the other stuff to say who controls the board. Which kind of rights are you giving the investors? Do you give investors the right to basically say that you can't enter into a transaction or some other process without the approval of not only the board, but certain members of the board, right? So these are all things that are much greater hindrances than, another $1 million of pre-money valuation and another little bit of dilution. Because like you said, if you hit your milestones, you're going to raise money at a better valuation, right? So
yeah. All of the entrepreneurs, I hope I've said this to them, all of the entrepreneurs with whom I'm working have heard me say, how they treat you before the deal is how they're going to treat you after the deal. So that relationship building, that trust factor, that exchange of facts, the assessment of salesmanship, that all happens prior to the actual money going in the company. And what happens after that, if you didn't have a good relationship beforehand, if there was a lot of friction, if someone didn't return your phone calls, don't expect it to change.
it's not going to change.
Yeah, that's pretty much life.
Yeah, kind of. There is no magical club that you step into that has everything changed now.
Right. And that goes both ways, by the way.
Oh, sure.
In terms of how the entrepreneur treats the venture investor.
Mhm.
If they're standoffish, if they're not sharing information, and I'm not saying that people, purposely withhold, I'm just saying that you may be a person who thinks I'm going to do this on my own and I don't need the input of someone. But when in fact, there could be a lot of referral work that's done in the background, et cetera.
You are with the signing of that piece of paper, you are stepping into a multi-year relationship regardless of the fate of your company. And your circle now touches many other circles within their operational sphere, because you're going to be at board meetings together, and there's going to be shared interactions in a lot of different ways. So hopefully you get to the point where things are healthy, and you get to the point where you have a good exchange and a really solid relationship. As a step down from that, it's fine if the relationship is tough, at least if it's professional, right? It's okay to have people drive each other pretty hard. There are investors that are notoriously tough and difficult to deal with, but at least in the case where they're ethical and everyone's driving for the same goals, it's a big business, and it's a big game to try to play.
Right.
So as a little bit more, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, but what about all those companies in our ecosystem that don't raise the capital?
Oh, we're going to get there. We're going to get there. We're going to get there. I wanted to just touch on one more thing before we did get there, which is just a little bit more background on the kind of companies that you work with now. So we can talk a little bit about AI and a little bit about perhaps tools companies. So just give us a little bit of a sense of the kind of companies that you gravitate towards and the kind of things that are really in your wheelhouse as an investor.
Yeah. So because when I was a young person, I had done some coding. I gravitate toward the computer side. I just, I was more of a math geek. I did some coding. I know how computers work. I've actually set up networks. Don't tell anybody. But so the transition that we're making now to artificial intelligence and all of the Internet of Things type of work that's being done is something that I feel very comfortable with. And I've met a lot of entrepreneurs involved in those types of companies. So I am currently involved with 2 or 3 AI businesses, of course, not in the same verticals. Some of them come out of the entrepreneurship programs that I work with at the academic medical centers. And some are part of an area of interest, the disability sector, which is important to me. So I work with them. And it's great because I think there are a lot of strategic partners in that sector, in the AI sector, that can be brought to bear with some of these companies, so you can really see them take off in a 2, 3, 4 year time frame. And it's it's much different from working with a therapeutics company, which I also have done, but to a smaller scale. Those are, of course, longer time frames.
Yep. And one of the really interesting things about AI companies is very often you have very smart people applying cutting edge things to new problems, right? Or looking at new problems in a different way. Many times in therapeutics companies, it's a reasonably straightforward progression. You have preclinical data, you're going to file an IND, your milestones are kind of laid out. Oftentimes within AI, you actually have people that can come and look at a problem from a different angle. And you can actually have them look at a situation and say, okay, well, why don't we try it this way? And why don't we do it a little bit differently, which is pretty exciting in a lot of ways.
Yeah, we have a great ecosystem here for digital health. And
Mhm.
just looking
Yeah.
at the funding amounts from Silicon Valley Bank's report and that kind of stuff, I mean, really wonderful. And of course, if you've been in New York long enough, you remember the New York New Media Association and all of that from the mid 1990s. That has all transitioned to helping more in the healthcare sector. And so we've got a vibrant set of activities that can go on here. And it's really helping, I think, in the life sciences sector and everything that your constituents are doing in terms of medical devices becoming more internet connected and that of sorts. It also helps on the computational science side. I mean, we're just really, I don't want to say happy is not the right word, but so interested in seeing how this is going to progress over the next several years.
Yeah. It's interesting because you have kind of multiple fronts where computational power and methods have advanced over the last decade, and you now have kind of different angles for those to be applied. It's almost like there is a bunch of different areas that were moving very, very fast and have all kind of pushed up against this innovation barrier. So now you have, it's not only kind of one new entrant into the scene, there's multiple ones, which is exciting because you have a lot of different points of view. You have a lot of different ways to approach new problems. And our academic environment is just about the most fertile ground you could find for these things. We have, an incredible population of younger professors, of postdocs, of graduate students, all of whom are working really on the cutting edge of things. And programs like the ones that you work in both Cornell and NYU are fostering a lot of that, which is great.
Yes, yes. We love working with the students, but we also love working with the faculty. You
Hmm.
have no idea how innovative and they're so entrepreneurial, they don't even realize they're entrepreneurs. Okay. And we've been talking about this. They have to raise money for themselves.
Mhm.
They have to manage people in their lab. They have to justify their existence on a regular basis. And that all translates to what we see in the startup world. So I like working with the faculty and of course the postdocs in making that transition from scientist and bridging them over to being more entrepreneurial. Some of them may not make that leap. Some of them may not walk across the bridge to permanently live, but
Hmm.
some do. And so we work with many of them there at the BioVenture eLab at Weill Cornell, and also teach some of them at NYU Langone's bioengineering program.
Loren, has that changed over time? The willingness of faculty to look at entrepreneurial, or I guess having more entrepreneurial attitude? It seems like we see more spin outs and more commercial development of IP from academic medical centers.
Yes, and I think it's on purpose. I think the institutions, Weill Cornell being one of many of our New York City ecosystems, that have put effort into training the faculty to think of themselves that way, training the postdocs to identify opportunity as they're working in the lab. And the students are always looking for ways to sort of shortcut their way to their next level in life. And so that's all well and good. And I think the academic institutions have put a lot of resources in place to help make that transition, or at least to provide the training and the resources to educate them along those lines. And that's what we do at both programs with which I work, but I know it's true at Mount Sinai. I know it's true at Einstein and other places.
We've actually got a question from the audience about working with the tech transfer offices. This seems like a pretty good place for that question. So what either advice do you give, or how have you found it helps to work with the tech transfer offices?
Quite honestly, I don't understand the hesitation of working with the tech transfer offices. Everybody that I've met, and I've done myself 3 spin outs of different institutions, one at Columbia, one at an institution in California, and one here at Weill Cornell. And in each place, there's nothing to fear. they make available information about how they will work with companies. It's on the website. There's a template license that you can look at, available from, not, it's available from Cornell University in the Weill Cornell case, but I'm sure there are other online sources for this. And you see, at least through some of the tech transfer offices in the New York City area, repeated posts from Loren and others about how they work with companies. So there's so much information. I think it's overwhelming, the level of information, and you want someone who can distill it down to some of the core things you need to look at.
Yeah.
Part of what I do is helping some of those folks, put together their cap table, for example, that kind of thing. But it's not something to be feared. Okay, I think that everyone there is working to the betterment of, their respective institutions, but that's okay.
Yeah, I get it in a sense, because if you're used to looking at those kind of documents, it's not a big deal. If you're not, it's a very new thing, and there's a lot of twists and turns. It's not always as straightforward as they would like it to be, because it's something new. Right? There's milestones, there's royalties, and even just reading the section on what does revenue mean is jumping through hoops for even the person who's trying to actually write the contract, let alone someone who's never read one of those contracts before. So for a process that tech transfer says we do our best to make everything easy, which for their part they do, right? But it doesn't mean it's a process where you sit down over a weekend and it's done. There's going to be some back and forth, and if you're not used to that, and you're not used to how those things go, or at least the level of uncertainty, it doesn't. People expecting a quote unquote easy process don't really know what a hard or contentious process looks like in that arena. So in a lot of ways, it's probably a bit of culture shock.
Yeah, and also it's probably the first time that some of these entrepreneurs, if they're first-time entrepreneurs, it's when they are at their most vulnerable, because it's a really important asset, the license.
Yeah.
And they don't really maybe have the experience on the negotiating side to understand the ranking of things that might be important to them to fight for. And so that I find the negotiation techniques or skills or whatever you want to call it, maybe something that they need help with. And that's fine. Everybody needs help. And you can seek that advice through advisors, mentors, your lawyer, other entrepreneurs, others, people in the ecosystem.
Yeah. Also remembering the fact that the tech transfer office works for the university, and the tech transfer office represents the university's IP. So the tech transfer office is not always necessarily on the quote unquote side of either the founders or the investors. They're trying to actually get to a fair deal. And they may be wearing the same jersey as the founder or the inventor, but they have different things that are guiding them that they have to abide by.
I think that's true, but I also think that everybody seeks to leave the table at least somewhat happy.
I think so.
So there's not a personality type that I have found in the technology transfer office that is gouging. Okay, at least not in the experiences that I've had. Everybody,
I haven't seen that.
Get to a place that is makes others kind of happy to go on and make it successful.
Yeah. Or the alternative, as we used to say when I worked in the U.S. Senate, if everyone leaves slightly unhappy, the deal was probably pretty good.
Yeah. No, it's true. But everybody tries to do a good job. And if you have questions, your law firm can help you, or if you're part of the institutions in which I'm involved, you can call me. I'm happy to help you.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are mentors. We have so many mentors at the BioVenture eLab. That's what they're there for. They're there to answer questions like that. And
So for the eLab, you're an entrepreneur in residence, correct?
Yes.
So as an EIR, what is your mandate as an EIR?
Okay. I don't have it in writing, but
Just make it up.
What is your
Lauren, go.
interpretation of your mandate?
No one will tell.
What do you think you're there to do?
I think my job is to work with some of these budding entrepreneurs at the institution, help them to make the company investable to the extent that it can raise outside financing and continue on its own after our fingerprints have been on it. And so as we do that, I have colleagues, you know, I work with Jahan there at BioVenture eLab, Jahan Ali, and she's great. And we talk, and Connor, and we talk all the time about the two components we are constantly working with. It's our M&M strategy, management and money. We are constantly in search of management and money for a lot of these business ideas. And sometimes we're very successful, and sometimes we've got to, you know, over apply some of our skill sets to try to make these things work.
Yep. Yep. We actually, you had mentioned SBIR funds before, and we talked a little bit about this yesterday. And we have a question here about some of the advantages of SBIR and Sttr grants and other sorts of NIH funding for companies. So I figure we can talk about that a little bit. So do you want to give a little bit of background on what people try to do with SBIR grants?
Sure. So at the stage where most companies go into a program like that, they're either still sitting in the academic environment or they've just left the academic environment. And at that stage, if you're not part of the 10 to 15% that are able to garner VC money, you know, seed stage VC money, then you've got to find your monetary resources somewhere else. And sometimes you can find some of it within the institution, but often you have to look outside the institution. And the best resources for that are non-dilutive funds. And of course, the NIH, and we joke, I love this moniker, America's Seed Fund, okay? It's a great place to get it. It's a rigorous process. It's not easy. In the New York City ecosystem, we get, I think it's 20% of all of the companies that apply for phase one actually receive phase one. So it's selective. And there are, you know, very intelligent, highly regarded scientists at NIH who go through these things in all the agencies, not just NIH, but all the agencies. And so it is a stepping stone to something bigger and better. And I would highly recommend it if you have the time and need to go through and raise that kind of raise that kind of money, you know, around the 250, 300 range.
Yep.
And it bridges, it allows you to get to some milestone, even if you're a therapeutics company. Are you able to do, you know, in vivo studies in a disease model? That's what you're trying to get to.
Yep.
We actually hosted, I think it was, gosh, the weeks run together. I think it was 2 weeks ago. We co-hosted a webinar with the NIAAA, talking about their specific tranche that they were looking for, right, to deploy in the alcohol and abuse area.
Yeah. And I've seen
one of the.
Go ahead, Derek.
I was going to say the IR in SBIR is innovative research, right? So one of the things that's important to note is that it pays for certain things, and actually getting towards scientific milestones is a really good use of those funds, but they don't pay for everything, right? It's not like, again, they give you this money in your bank account and it's untethered and you can go do what you want with it. I mean, in theory you could, but you'll never get another federal grant ever again. There's some oversight there too.
Right. And I think there is a need, there's a definite need for some type of matching funds for SBIR, Sttr grants in our ecosystem. In our ecosystem, you know, there are some wonderful foundational VCs who can come in and do a lot of good things for early stage companies. But for those companies that are, again, not part of that cohort that received the VC money at that stage, then they do need an extra boost. And the extra boost could come from a combination of SBIR grants, other non-dilutive capital from foundations, and also, if we were to make it a reality, perhaps some type of SBIR matching fund, which I think is desperately needed here.
That would be awesome. You know, this is an idea that that has been around in a couple of forms for a while. I had a discussion on this a decade ago, but even since then, I was actually looking through my emails to try and find those discussions. And actually, two other people that I had said, you know, people should just literally find a way to match the phase one money for SBIRs. And I think it's a great idea for a few reasons, because, you know, number one, it gets around the idea that the government is picking winners, right? That whatever fund this is, it doesn't have to pick things based on a management team. You're picking things based on scientific merit. And what you're doing is kind of giving all of these companies with good science the capital to advance the other things that they need to advance, whether it's bringing on, bringing on better team members, whether it's adding out to their regulatory strategy, but it basically fills out and fills around the things that the SBIR is really good at doing.
Right, because the SBIR, as you note, will cover certain direct research costs, only a certain amount of indirect research costs. So you can't have a lot of overhead. You're always skimping on the administrative side of things. And also, I will say, you know, you spoke to some folks. This idea did not come out of the air. This came from an entrepreneur, and I'll give her credit, Charlotte DeHoltz at Nsfi Technologies, who talked about this several years ago. She said it would have helped her if she had some SBIR matching funds. So
yeah. And they're a success story, right? They've done unbelievably well. They've managed to build off a really great science. They've built a really good team. They've now got a strong investment group behind them. You know, they're in a corner of launch labs. They've got a full team they've built out there. You know, we had the good fortune of literally sitting next to them for a year. So I can't say enough good things about that team. They're awesome.
Yeah. And hopefully we can make something happen. If I could add one thing to our ecosystem, that would be the thing I would add at this stage.
I think that would be hugely valuable. I think if there was a way to do that, I think that would make a lot of impact. You know, we talked a little bit about kind of shots on goal, and, you know, one of the questions that I had wanted to ask you is, do you see kind of higher quality deals coming out of New York? But you had said earlier, you just see more, right? And I think there's a normal distribution, but there's definitely more.
Yes, definitely more. There's more coming from the academic institutions. There's more coming from, I think, just a transition from some of these digital health businesses becoming maybe more healthcare focused, which we would have counted maybe on the technology side previously.
Yeah.
So there's more. I think we have very high quality deals. Of course, it is a normal distribution. I also think that there's a lot more activity in terms of the resources around the entrepreneur, Derek. For example, a lot of the service providers that we know, I think that part of the industry has developed quite nicely. So you can get a lot of different services here in the ecosystem that heretofore were not really active, or they didn't have a salesperson with feet on the ground here in New York. So, and of course, the landscape has changed. There's more incubation space. There's activity along that line in the real estate sector, which makes it a little easier to find places for these folks to go. It's all in transition. I just had a company coming out of Weill Cornell that had a really hard time trying to find some space, but he's landed in a good place now.
That's good. I think the other thing that's been brought out of the woodwork is that because we now have these spaces where these early companies can live, it actually allows, you know, investors to focus a little bit. It allows investors to walk in. If you walk in and see one company and there's 15 other companies there too, you just by osmosis you get exposed a little bit more. So I think the fact that we've now had these early companies congregating in their own spaces, it actually allows the investment community to say, oh, there's many companies here all at once, rather than just needing to find them serially and having a random office in Midtown. I stand by my assertion that I would love to see a biotech company never set foot in a WeWork building ever again.
Yeah.
I like having biotech companies near biotech companies.
Yeah, that's that. Well, you've got space being built at Park Avenue by Deerfield. You've got everything good happening in Long Island City.
Yeah.
You've got the wonderful things happening in the upper parts of Manhattan, Columbia, and on the other side, of course, I'm partial to the Upper East Side ecosystem because I live there part-time. So I think it's really wonderful what's been happening. I do think sometimes we get some hiccups, and we have to overcome some of those hiccups, but we seem to be in a better place.
Yep.
We had one question, Loren, that's talking about milestones. You had raised that, right? Because that's obviously part of the process. And they asked, can you share your insights on how to develop milestones for, say, pharma biotech versus technology AI companies? How do you look at them differently?
Well, on the pharma biotech side, it depends on where you are in your development. Do you have a compound? Is there something that you're working on that has been identified to work on a target in a certain disease using a certain animal model? And what data have you been able to generate to develop your chain of evidence to show that it's actually going to work? So it really depends on where you are in that process. Some of the folks we work with there at Weill Cornell, they do much of the early development work in the laboratory. They get to a point where, for example, this group I was just talking about, they have an idea of how this product is going to work in certain neurological disorders. They decided to spin out and raise some SBIR money in order to do some of that early research. They don't have animal data yet. They're building the animal data as a company rather than inside the institution. But you, of course, could do that, assuming you could find the resources in your institution. So it really depends on where you are.
Yep, and because you have a breadth of applications, milestones can be different for a lot of different things. And in general, most of the milestone game is trying to say, okay, these are the things that we'd like to see you hit. What are the things that are actually going to be an inflection point for either the science or business, or how can we get to the next stage of what we're going to do? And you talked about this before with M&Ms, right? You don't necessarily need 50 million. You need enough runway to get to here. And after you get to here, you need to go take the next step.
Normally those pharma biotech opportunities, they all want to reach the IND stage. So if you want to get to the IND stage, what do you have to do and work backwards from there? You need to develop your compound. You need to make sure that compound works on the target that you're focused on. You need to develop the chain of evidence that shows that target actually, if you are inhibiting or whatever it is you're doing, it is having an effect on the disease that you're focused on. And is that chain of evidence including just in vitro data, or did you do some in vitro work as well? So all of those different, you could call them milestones, you could call them just the work that you have to do, which has got to go into your IND anyway. You're putting together that chain of evidence. And of course, in the IND section, you also have to put together some information about manufacturing. So you have to talk about how that's going to work.
Yeah.
So those would be some milestones I would try to put together on a development plan, map that out on your development plan, find out how much it's going to cost you to get to IND, and work from there.
Backwards.
Yeah. Because there's investors where their first question is very often about timelines rather than, where are you with the science? When is this going to be put into a human? because there is a very big dividing line between the valuation of a preclinical company and what you can call a clinical stage biotechnology company. Those two phrases are very, very different in the valuation that they carry.
Although this year it may be the line has been blurred.
The one thing I will
all
say,
valuations, they're all up.
the one thing I will say when you're putting together that development plan is don't forget the overhead, because many people forget, oh, I have 3 people who aren't in the laboratory, or I have to pay my rent and my insurance and my lawyer and all that. So don't forget the overhead.
Yeah. Loren, we had a question as we're talking about the different types of investing. What about family offices and how they impact the New York investing ecosystem?
I adore working with family offices because typically it's very smart people with patient capital, and patience is very much necessary in our part of the world. Particularly if you're focused on the therapeutic side, although I don't know a lot of I know some, but not a lot of family offices that will invest in therapy. But yes, a very good source if you can find the right match. It also takes a lot of time to dissect whether a family office is going to be appropriate for what you're trying to do. So you typically have to spend a lot of time with the people. It's a lot of relationship building. They often don't have dedicated resources for a particular biomed focus, so you have to be careful.
There's a lot of, you have to realize that a lot of them are mission driven, and there's also probably a lot of education around what you're doing, and that's before you even get to, is this something that they'd want to invest in, and does your data shake out where they want to? But I think you've hit the nail on the head with patient capital. They can be really, really useful. They have, like you said, those very smart people, and very oftentimes they have good connectivity to other offices and other very, very smart people. The fit really has to be there, and if you get it, it can be excellent, and it can be turbocharging, but it's a lot of work.
I will say that oftentimes the best family office relationships occur when the family has been affected by whatever you're focused on. So, in the disability sector, I know that that's certainly the case. There's a large family here in the New York City area that I know focuses on diabetes, for example. Those things, I think once the family is affected, they want to make a difference in that particular disease category.
Right. And in many cases, when you get people like that, the education is there. They understand, not only the best ones understand not only the ins and outs of the disease, but they bring their own experience, and they bring a whole lot of other things to the table. So So we had a question to wind it back a little bit to government funding. We had a question about NSF and I-Corps programs for medical and pharma startups, and I wonder if those kind of fit into what you're doing, because the kind of lean method is sometimes challenging to apply to life science startups. It's not always quite as good a fit as it is in other areas.
But it's an imperative. Okay, I know we all want to shortcut this process. It can't be shortcut. Okay, that's the pithy answer. Are the NSF I-Corps programs important? They super duper are important, and you need to understand your customer. Again, I go back to what I said. Maybe I said this earlier. Being a VC, you're not in front of the customer on a regular basis. Maybe you go to a trade show, maybe you know 1 or 2 of the top 10 in that particular category, but you're not in front of the customer on a regular basis. As the entrepreneur, you've got to be in front of the customer all the time, understanding what their needs are and understanding what the product is going to be to serve those needs. So the NSF I-Corps program is a fantastic way of bringing together resources and people who can train you to do the primary market research that you need to do via interviews, focus groups, etc. There are programs run through Weill Cornell. I know there are programs run through NYU Langone as well. And
Mhm.
we do highly encourage all of our entrepreneurs going through those programs to make that commitment. I think it's 4 or 5 different days that you have to be available for those programs to do your primary market research. And, you know, the number one reason they say why companies fail is they don't have the right product market fit. And so if you don't have the time to spend learning what your customer needs are and mapping that journey, I don't have, I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest advantages there is it makes you ask tough questions, and it makes you expose yourself to things that you may not want to hear or you may not have heard before, right? By going in front of the actual customer or literally anyone else where you have to sell your idea, even if it's not to an investor, you get the feedback from those stakeholders, which may not be perfect in every instance. In fact, it's really unlikely to be. So forcing people to get out of their comfort zone with that is a real advantage.
If you don't want to do it yourself, all right, let's say you're not an extrovert and you don't want to be out there, you can pay people to do that kind of work. And we have some resources in our ecosystem that may do it as part of a like a challenge.
Yeah.
You know, if you have a really good idea, they'll front you the resources to get your primary market research done. I will tell you, it does raise the level of confidence from the VC point of view to see some of that work in the pitch deck. It does help. And maybe it may be harder on the therapeutic side because, you know, you don't know if you're going to be first line therapy. That's understandable. But on the wearables, on the digital health, on the medical devices, if you've spoken to whoever your end user is, the customer, the doc, or the hospital, or the patient, if you've done, you know, your 30 to 50 interviews, I think that can be very powerful and add to the credibility of your story.
Okay. So you said if you're not an extrovert, right? And so I want to ask a question about getting entrepreneurs outside of their comfort zone, right? If you're not an how do you talk to entrepreneurs about, you know, basically stretching themselves a bit? I don't think people need to be an extrovert to be an entrepreneur, and I think there are advantages to being an introvert. But when you have someone that is an entrepreneur, how do you get them to kind of stretch and recognize the things that they may be less comfortable with or they may not be quite as good at, almost regardless of what it is? How do you kind of talk to them about trying to do the things that they might not be the best at? Because now they have to do everything, right? How do you try and talk them and get them comfortable with things that they might not be good at first or that might not come naturally to them?
Well, I don't know that I do that very well, but imitation is one thing. Okay, if you can show them this is how it's done, then they can imitate that that behavior or what, you know, that questionnaire or whatever it is. Humor helps. Everyone likes to laugh, and so I think if you can bring someone's personality out through some humor, I think that's helpful. If it's really not who you are, you know, in terms of talking to other people, then you need complementary skills. And how do you find those complementary skills? You have to go out in the marketplace and try to find a partner who can help you. And by the way, it's not just talking to people. It's putting together financial statements. It's making sure you can negotiate with that manufacturing group and get a good deal on the timing and the product quality that you're going to need on whatever that end product is. So you need to go out to the marketplace and you need to find a resource, a partner who's going to work with you and help you make this idea a success.
Yeah. I think a lot of people have a vision of what they think an entrepreneur is or should be, and you have this extroverted archetype that people hold up. But in a lot of ways, you find that great companies are led by people that are good at what they do and put other people around them that complement their strengths to build a really good organization. I don't think anybody just fits in a single entrepreneur box.
Yeah. I often think about all of those CEOs who have to go to the investor conferences, let's say one a month to talk about their stock. And they're telling the same story over and over again to the group of investors who have probably heard it, who probably know them quite well. They're just looking for that little kernel of information that they didn't know before. And is that highest and best use of their time? Okay, this constant repetitive storytelling for them, they have to do it because that's part of being a CEO, but it's not necessarily, I think, how they would choose to spend their time if they were to allocate it themselves. So it can be painful, but it's necessary. So
well, and also, I mean, part of the process, right, of getting better and getting more comfortable is also realizing that your audience, like your approach to your audience matters. You can't approach every potential investor in exactly the same way. You have to understand what they're interested in order to, even if it's a personality approach, I think that makes a difference.
Yeah, so there are, we talk a little bit in our circle with the budding entrepreneurs. We talk about persuasion skills.
Yeah.
And we talk about how you go from a scientific presentation, very fact-based, very didactic, to how do you engage the investor, engage the audience, and much of that is done through crafting this story of how you came to your product idea, or how you want to help patients in a certain way. And that story then touches the emotion of the audience, and it's that emotional connection which actually enters the cranial matter. Okay, that's what burns it into the cranium. And if you don't have that, it's not landing.
Yeah, but you have to have both, right? And that's hard for, I know, just some personality types. You've got to be able to do both. They are lucky to have you helping them navigate the way, that's for sure.
Yeah, very much. Okay, so we have just a couple minutes left, and I would leave it to you for some parting thoughts, Loren. I would say that over the past however many years, you have been both a voice of incredible support and really kind of thoughtful help and feedback and mentoring for so many entrepreneurs and startups in the New York City area. We are absolutely lucky to have you. So I will leave it for you to kind of close out with just a couple of takeaways, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay, well, I would say follow your dream, make it happen. It doesn't happen on its own. Make it happen. And if you're stuck, get some help. There are a lot of resources here in the ecosystem. Jennifer and Derek are certainly wonderful in terms of what they offer every Tuesday morning, but there's a lot NewYorkBIO and other groups and systems around New York City. They want to help you. We want to make this successful.
Thank you so much. And we will leave it on that note of success. You're awesome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate Bye, everyone.
It.
All right. Thanks, Loren, and have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to NewYorkBIO's virtual breakfast series. Join us every Tuesday at 9 a.m. for more discussions with leaders from across the healthcare spectrum. For more information on NewYorkBIO, please visit us at www.newyorkbio.org.